Hello, and welcome to the weekly astrology podcast, Cozy with the Cosmos, where we meet every Thursday. We light our candles, we grab our blankies, we snuggle up, we get so cozy, and we talk all things cosmos. I am your host, astrologer, and coach, Sarah Paasch, and this week's episode brings us to our focus topic on malefics, the planets Saturn and Mars. Before we dive into the focus on Saturn and Mars, I want to take a moment to just center ourselves together for this episode. So I invite you, if you can, if it's safe, go ahead, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and just invite a deep, slow, steady breath in through your nose. And open mouth, slow, steady exhale. And allow these words to rest in your heart and mind. Today, may we feel Saturn's steady rings drawing a boundary of protection around us, a reminder that we are grounded and that we can hold the weight of wisdom. And may we imagine Mars flame sparking inside of us, the courage, clarity, and fire we need to cut through what no longer serves. Together we welcome this endurance of Saturn and the courage of Mars as our teachers today. To complete this opening ritual, I invite us all to go ahead again, take that deep, steady inhale through the nose. Open mouth, exhale. Let it go. So this week, our focus topic is all about the malefics in astrology. Why this week? Why now are we bringing in this focus topic? Well, if you listened to last week's episode, we opened this new lunar cycle, the Virgo new moon partial solar eclipse, and we talked about the heavy influence of Mars and Saturn throughout this lunar cycle. These planets are very active as teachers, as hard lessons. We are being initiated into Saturn and Mars throughout the cycle. So because these planets are so active and their themes are going to continue to participate loudly throughout the cycle, I thought it might be helpful to educate ourselves, to inform ourselves a little bit more about what malefics really are. So in today's episode, we're zooming in on Saturn and Mars themselves, the two malefics. We're going to understand why ancient astrologers gave them this reputation and how we can actually work with their challenges, their challenging transits, as part of our growth. And next week, we'll be doing our full moon horoscopes and tarot card pulls for every rising sign for that Aries full moon ruled by Mars. And the same day that we have that Aries full moon, we've got Mercury entering into Scorpio, Mars's home sign, co-present with Mars, and reactivating that intense square to Pluto and Aquarius. So if you aren't already, go ahead, make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, turn your notifications on. That way you're going to get notified and catch that episode to hear how these malefic themes are filtering into your own rising sign story throughout this lunar cycle. If you know anybody who could benefit from hearing about these malefics in astrology, be sure to share this video with your friends or maybe your foes. Okay, so with that, let's dive in. I want to start with the actual definition of malefic. Malefic comes from the word maleficus, and this translates as bringer of harm. The planets Mars and Saturn are what we consider the malefics, or the bringers of harm. And this is in contrast with Venus and Jupiter, the astrological benefics, or the quote-unquote good bringers, the life givers, the providers of support. But here's the key. Malefics aren't evil. They are not punishments. They are simply the parts of life that feel hard, cold, or sharp. Even the ancients didn't view malefics as moral punishments. They saw them as a part of the blend of existence, the tension that makes growth possible. As Valens reminds us in the anthology, and I quote, "The entire universe is mingled with good and evil, the favorable and the unfavorable. It is not possible for men to receive all good things without the bad, nor all bad things without some good. For it is necessary that life be a blend so that we may endure both what is useful and what is difficult." And locating where we are in time and space, notice, where are Saturn's walls or Mars' fire active in your life right now. And instead of maybe resisting, start to invite, start to ask, what would it be like to work with this experience as my teacher, my ally, instead of my enemy? My intention is for this to really set the stage of our understanding in today's focus topic. We're going to dive now into the specifics, the natures of both Saturn and Mars as planets, as malefics in astrology. Let's start with Saturn. So the temperament of Saturn is cold and dry, or also known as melancholic. Saturn's nature is heavy, slow, and constricting. And the experience of Saturn in life can feel like this confrontation with necessity, with needing to make difficult choices that require sacrifice, sometimes loss, and a sense of a bearing weight and responsibility. Saturn tends to constrict or withhold. And Saturn is also the ruler of time. And so Saturn transits can feel like they last forever. They don't. But Saturn is a slower moving planet. It takes Saturn about 2.5 years to just go through one sign. So because the Saturn transit is slower, the growth tend to be experienced a little bit deeper. It takes a little bit longer. We need that Saturn time to really mature and develop whatever that is that Saturn's helping us to grow or to change. In the ancient texts, Valen said that Saturn is cold and dry. He brings about obstruction, sorrow, despair, grief, misfortune, poverty, and a manner of life of toil and hardship. Yet when well situated, he makes men serious, profound, laborious, competent, and authoritative. I will also note that something that is really helpful to remember about Saturn is that Saturn is always the hardest in our first 30 years of life because we just aren't old enough and mature enough and experienced enough in life to understand the benefit or the wisdom of Saturn. So if you're somebody who's under 30 years old, you haven't yet started your Saturn return, your first Saturn return, don't worry. You're going to feel a change, a complete change in your relationship to Saturn, hopefully after that Saturn return. And if you're wondering what a Saturn return is, that phrase, maybe you've heard it before, that's something to definitely look into and maybe even get a reading with a professional astrologer because it is one of the most important and pivotal transits that we all go through between the ages of 28 and 31. So now let's talk a little bit about just the fundamentals, the essential nature of Mars. Mars temperament is hot and dry, also known as choleric. And the nature of Mars is sharp, severing, fiery, and restless. Mars brings a sense of ambition and drive and also a fight. So sometimes it can be an actual confrontation or competition that we're put into, but Mars is really invoking that fight within us. It is our sense and need for assertion, self-assertion, assertion of boundaries. So the gift of Mars is to bring the fire of courage, the fire of inspiration and motivation and ambition. With Mars' power to cut, it has a decisive quality to it, so we can begin to take decisive actions. And also Mars teaches us how to perform or how to show up and rise to the challenges when we're met with any kind of crisis. Mars is the warrior inside all of us. In the ancient text, Valen says about Mars, Mars is fiery and dry. He signifies force, wars, plunder, capture, banishment, anger, lying in wait, and violence. When well placed, he makes men command armies, lead ventures, and be victorious in struggles. So Saturn constricts and withholds, while Mars cuts and pushes. Both can feel punishing when we don't have a necessarily constructive relationship with these planets for whatever reason. But in their philosophical framework, these malefics, these are actually necessary forces that temper and balance us and our experience of life to develop more strength, to develop more wisdom and endurance. So taking a little pause here, comment below, Do you know where your Mars and Saturn are in your natal chart? Or tell me, what is your current relationship status with Mars Saturn? Are you on the fence? Are you all in? Are you all out? I'd love to hear. And I also want to share that my personal relationship, it wasn't until a little bit later into my astrological journey that I actually found out and came to terms with the fact that Mars is the strongest planet, like by far, in my natal chart. Saturn is also incredibly dignified and strong in my natal chart, responsible for multiple planets in other places. So I've kind of been forced this lifetime to really get to know these planets. And I will say that at this point in my journey, I can say I'm a huge advocate for them. They have been some of the most constructive planets, not only in my own psychological and emotional development and well-being and makeup as a person, but going through really significant transits and timing that activate Mars and Saturn, I really recognize that for me personally, they're nuanced, they're felt very constructive and rewarding. And so this is part of what I want to make sure that's communicated in this episode, is that just like what we're doing in our Living Chartwork group mentorship program, where we're really talking about this nuance of natal context, this nuance of the planetary expression and the relationship that can feel constructive or not. So I really encourage you, take some time to investigate your own personal Mars and Saturn, and also investigate and reflect as we go through this episode. What are the things that maybe hit and feel a little bit sensitive? Like, I don't like that word, or they feel empowering. What is it activating inside of you, inside of your body? And that's something to maybe lean into as this reference point for the developmental point or place that you're in when it comes to your relationship with these planets, these more difficult planets in astrology. So coming back to this question we brought in the beginning, this definition of malefics as evil doers, right? My question to propose for myself and for us is it true that struggle is inherently bad, or is it a valid part of our cosmic necessity for a greater wholeness? Is it true that a Saturn transit that withholds the ability to get what you want for that immediate gratification, is it true that that's bad? Or what is that teaching us? What is that forcing us to develop within ourselves? Is it true that the severing quality of Mars is bad? Or is it necessary in order to teach us and to encourage us to cut away and sever what doesn't really serve us? So let's pull in a couple everyday examples to kind of ground this and relate to this in reality. Let's talk about Saturn. So have you ever experienced a moment in your life where you decisively set a new standard for what it is that you wanted in your life? So this could be a relationship. Maybe you set a new standard of the kind of partner or the kind of friendship that you were going to engage with. You set a boundary within yourself of what you will say yes to and what you will say no to. And at first you expected this to kind of result in an immediate manifestation of that new standard of relationship. But maybe you had to go through months or years of feeling lonely, feeling like you were being withheld from connection, from that standard of connection, from intimacy. And in that Saturn time, that window of waiting, when you reflect back, do you recognize a deeper level of authority and commitment and internal self-respect for upholding your agreement to hold that standard, to hold that boundary? Another example of this is deciding to divert from a career or a work life that wasn't truly of value to you. It didn't have a deeper meaning or purpose behind it. And you decided to start your own business, to follow your dream. And Saturn forced you to not get the immediate reward, the immediate success. Saturn said you have to prove that you mean it, that you want it, that even if it doesn't happen right away, you're really going to follow through on that commitment. So there's a delay in the reward, there's a delay in the success. And when that success finally does come, imagine how much you don't even need the success to validate what Saturn has forced you to validate within yourself in that process of waiting. So let's take this to Mars. Let's take this to our fiery malefic. Think about a time when you reached a certain threshold, kind of like a breaking point in a relationship, when there was a sudden eruption of confrontation, a fight. There was no longer denying the harm of holding on to this dynamic or relationship. It forced you to confront what you needed to end, what you needed to cut away. And it wasn't until it pushed you, which Mars does, to a place where it was so hard, it was so uncomfortable, it was so maybe even painful that you were forced to cut it away, to make that end, to sever it. Another example of Mars is I think about my relationship to starting Muay Thai. I did that during a very pivotal, life-changing Mars transit. Pluto was squaring my natal Mars in Aries, and I was really being trained on how to fight. What does it mean to really stand up for yourself, to defend yourself? And how do you do so in a way that doesn't feel violent, that doesn't feel like it's hurting just to hurt or causing harm just to cause harm? There is a constructive place for fight. There is a constructive place for defense. And so I remember that being this really slow churn, slow burn, plutonic process of coming to terms with this healthy function and use of Mars to say, this is not okay. This is something worth defending. This is something worth fighting and standing up and pushing through to the point of exhaustion to prove to myself that I'm worth it, that there is a me that is worth defending. So now, using this everyday example of this current moment we're living in during this eclipse cycle and the intense squares with Mars in Scorpio to Pluto in Aquarius, what is it feeling like for you right now? Checking in with yourself, the things that are coming up that really feel like a struggle. They feel like the hard, the unwanted parts of our human experience. Do they feel painful yet liberating? Do they feel like this invitation for you to strengthen something within yourself related to these themes of Saturn and Mars that we're talking about? Are you willing to engage or to invite this vantage point of working with what is hard and the intention of what that could develop for you long term? And if I ask you that question and you're feeling a little bit stuck or a little bit like, I have no idea where to start, or I don't even know where I'm at, I thought it might be kind of helpful to talk about these kind of symbolic stages of growth. So if Saturn feels hopeless in the moment, or Mars is leaving us feeling overwhelmed by the struggle or the pain, how do we grow our relationship with them over time? I'm going to propose a sort of stage of development, a stage of growth in our evolution in relationship to these planets, and kind of describe what I view as the way to locate where we're at in a transit or within our relationship to them within our natal context by where we kind of land on this spectrum. So I'm going to list 5 proposed stages of growth with malefics. Stage 1, being overwhelmed. Overwhelmed with Saturn means that it feels crushing. We feel that sense of hopelessness. We might feel a sense of despair. It's a sense of feeling overwhelmed by the weight of time and the weight of withholding, the lack of receiving what it is that we really want. With Mars, the sense of being overwhelmed is likely to present itself as a sense of chaos. The things that are happening that feel like this overwhelming sense of not feeling in control, feeling overwhelmed by what's coming at us, and this inability to take charge or to assert with agency, to feel in control rather than just in crisis or overwhelmed in crisis. Stage 2 in our growth with the malefics is recognition of repeating patterns. With Saturn, we notice we're hitting the same walls. The same limits tend to come again and again and again. We feel like we take one step forward, and Saturn puts us 3 steps back. But what is our pattern in showing up to that wall, to that frustration, to that limitation? That's the repeating pattern that Saturn needs us to identify before we can go to stage 3. With Mars, stage 2 and the repeating pattern, it's like the same fights, the same feeling of helplessness, the same feeling of everything's out of control. So maybe there's also a collapse, a pattern of collapse in response to the overwhelm of the chaos of Mars. Or there's a pattern and a repeating loop around how we fight. The fights we tend to have end in the same way. Is there a healthy resolution or repair pattern? If we're still not developed with Mars, it's likely that that's not the case. And if that's you, don't worry. We're all human. And we're all always waking up to where we are just in a loop of unconscious repetition of old patterns that we're ready to outgrow, we're ready to interrupt and do something different. You're not alone. I'm constantly growing along this spiral path. So that brings us to stage 3. Stage 1 is overwhelm. Stage 2 is the recognition of the repeating pattern. Same frustrations, same fights. Now, stage 3, we start turning a corner. This is when we start consciously cultivating a new response to Saturn and Mars. So with Saturn, instead of repeating our frustration, our hopelessness, our despair, we start developing a response of patience, of trust, of discipline and follow through. We start sacrificing our desire to get what it is that we want now. And we start really giving ourselves wholeheartedly, willing to wait and follow through on our commitments. With Mars, we start to consciously cultivate a new response to these same fights. With Mars, I really see this word skillful being the thing that is the most important or the most beneficial when we're starting to interrupt the repeating pattern and bring in a new conscious response. The places where we collapse, or the places where we feel defeated, or we go into unhealthy fighting mechanisms, we go fight or flight, or even like wanting to force or overpower, there's something new that we can learn here. And I think this is something I've learned with Mars through time and through life. The need to seek out teachers, role models, and containers for actually learning these new things as skills, really learning, educating myself. Well, if I'm going to be better at asserting a boundary, I need to learn what an actual healthy boundary is. I need to learn the difference between function and dysfunction. There's a skill development of awareness there. And then I also need to learn the skillfulness of negotiation, of communication. So it's not just about the skill of assertion itself. It's not just about getting a sword. It's also knowing when to use a sword and when to not. How to hold the sword properly, where to start the swing, where to follow through. And so with Mars, it's kind of like we're cultivating these conscious check and balances that weren't previously there. We're evolving our healthy understanding of function and dysfunction, of what's right, of what's wrong, of our yeses and our nos. And then stage 4 is actual functional use. We spend a lot of time in stage 3. We spend a lot of time learning and failing and learning and failing. But then when we get to stage 4, this functional use, we start feeling and experiencing Saturn as discipline. We start experiencing Mars as courage. So this might be an example of, instead of procrastinating on the things that we need to do in order to accomplish our goals, now we're at a place with Saturn where we're willing to do the thing we didn't want to do that frustrates us, but follow through because we've invoked that conscious cultivation of commitment, of sacrifice, of follow through. Now we develop a sense of deeper self-trust, right, to follow through on ourselves. So that's a functional use of Saturn, self-discipline. We set small goals, we follow through on them, and we feel rewarded with a greater sense of self-trust and self-respect. A functional use of Mars is courage. Now that we're not wasting our energy fighting the wrong fights, or we're collapsing in the face of what feels like a crisis or a challenge that feels overwhelming and chaotic, now Mars gives us the courage to know when to set the sword down versus when to pick the sword up and execute, putting something to an end, standing up for ourselves. Another really functional use of Mars and courage is the willingness to fail, the willingness to be brave enough to put ourselves out there, to try something new that we haven't tried before, or to try it in a way we've never done it before, and to know that we have the Mars strength to learn from that mistake or that failure, to pick ourselves back up. There's a new form of resiliency that Mars helps us to bring into that functional use of courage. As we start moving from stage 3 of cultivating conscious responses to Saturn and Mars problems, and we start experiencing for ourselves the benefits internally, externally of stage 4 functional uses of these planets, in stage 5, we reach, hopefully, a place of integration. And this is the moment where that definition, that perception and relationship of malefics as bad, seeing our struggles as enemies, now our struggles become our greatest allies. Our relationship to Saturn and Mars becomes not only functional, but it becomes very necessary and useful and resourceful. We need them. They're some of the strongest players on our team, especially for some of the most difficult moments of life. So taking a moment to pause, checking in, I'm wondering, how do you relate to these stages of growth or evolution with the malefics, with Saturn and Mars? Is there any area or arena in your life currently that you can locate where you're at on this spectrum of relationship evolution and growth? Maybe in relationship fields, you are totally integrated when it comes to Mars. You can totally get into confrontation. But when it comes to your work or the things that you're passionate about, you're still struggling and feeling overwhelmed and collapsing in the face of challenge or something new. And this is going to be different for everybody, but I'd love to hear, comment below if any of this resonates or there's something that's really standing out. And tell me if you feel any differently about your capacity to work through, to confront, and to resource what's happening as an ally instead of an enemy. Of course, there are so many other additional layers that are really important to take into consideration that really nuance the Saturn and Mars expression, both within our natal charts and then also as we experience transits. These are things that I definitely take into consideration with my client practice and in readings and consultations. However, I didn't want to go deep into them in today's episode. I wanted to focus more on some of the philosophical and the relational components of working with Saturn and Mars as malefics. But I am going to go ahead and list some of these considerations off for you without going into the technical explanations. If it's something that interests you, I really encourage you. You can check out different astrology resources, do some more investigation, or of course, always book an astrology reading with a professional astrologer. I have that linked below for you if you'd like to look into working together. But the additional astrological techniques that we would take into consideration when looking at and working with Saturn and Mars, the first would be sect. If you've never heard of that word before, sect is determined based off of the time that you're born. So if you're born after sunrise, then you will be considered a day sect chart. If you are born after the sun set or crossed the descendant point in your chart, then you will be of the night sect. In relation to sect, Saturn prefers the day sect. Saturn is said to be easier or more constructive in day charts, and Mars, on the other hand, is said to be of the night sect, so is more constructive to individuals born in the night sect. The next consideration is dignity. We did not go over dignity today, but this is such an important and powerful layer of consideration. And when Saturn or Mars are in dignity, so either rulership or exaltation, they are said to have an easier access to their natural constructive function, that they express themselves more constructively. And I will go ahead and list those dignities for you. So with Saturn's dignity, it's in domicile and the ruler of Capricorn as well as Aquarius, And Saturn is exalted in Libra. Those are the places where Saturn does the best and is the most constructive. And Mars is the ruler of Aries and Scorpio and exalted in Capricorn, Saturn's sign. Interesting. So again, you can kind of check your chart. Like, do your malefics fall into any of those home placements? Are they dignified? Layer that into your interpretation and your reflections. And then finally, I wanted to mention the planetary joys. So the joys are the houses or the places in astrology where some planets tend to be what's called in their joy. And this doesn't mean that they necessarily function better in these places. It just means that they have a natural affinity to the topics and the themes that tend to be experienced in those places in the chart. So for Saturn, Saturn finds its joy in the 12th house, the house of isolation, solitude, retreat, self-undoing. And for Mars, Mars finds its joy in the 6th house, the house of daily grind, the house of toil, of conflict, of the effort that's required to confront the challenges of everyday life. And again, the joys are not the places these planets necessarily do the best. It's just the place in our life and in the chart that has the most natural affinity for what these planets naturally signify and are here to express. And again, these are all very important layers of consideration when we're going to work with, investigate, or talk about our Saturn and Mars in our natal chart and transits. It's just not something we were going to cover in today's episode. And I really encourage you, if you haven't ever gotten a professional astrology reading, it's a really great opportunity for you to do that deeper work of unpacking the nuances that are so important for understanding and working with those planets in your natal chart. These are the nuances that make astrology personal. And this is the work that we're really doing in our Living Chartwork mentorship program that begins in October. And if you haven't heard about the Living Chartwork program, real quick, it is a very hands-on, intense, immersive experience where we have a very high-touch, small group of people, and we dive into all of these natal context nuances of your chart and how to explore and work with the chart from this grounded personal place. This cohort is already full. We sold out, which is so exciting. But there is an opportunity to sign up for our email list so that way you can be notified right away when we launch our next cohort. And of course, all the information about that mentorship program can be found on my website, as well as that newsletter sign up for the next cohort launch announcement. And as we close today's episode, just as we opened, I'd like to invite us to come back to that space, that central space within ourselves. And if it's safe to do so, maybe closing your eyes, resting your hand on your heart and your feet on the ground, and begin to invite a slow, steady breath in through our nose and a slow, steady breath out of our mouth. As we close this container, may we feel Saturn's strength anchoring us, the reminder that patience and endurance shape true wisdom. May we feel the warmth of Mars' fire in our chest, the courage to act, the clarity to move forward. As we close and go forward, may we all carry Saturn's steadiness and Mars' flame with us into this week, into the coming months and years, as lessons and guides on our path to shape us. Maybe malefics aren't here to just ruin our lives. Maybe they're actually here to help shape us. Thank you, everybody who joined me on today's episode of Cozy with the Cosmos. If you haven't already, make sure you've got your notifications turned on because next week brings us to our Aries full moon and our rising sign horoscopes tarot card pull episode. May the walls of Saturn and the fires of Mars in the coming weeks show you just how strong you really are. I'm Sarah Paasch, and I will see you here next Thursday.